Superheroes, they're the stuff of legends, and they're at the heart of some of our favorite stories. Now they're also putting their superpowers to good use to teach millions of students reading and writing skills. I'm Mike Walder in Los Angeles. Let's take it full frame. Stan Lee is considered by many to be a revolutionary in the comic book industry. He's the co-creator of comic book icons like Spider-Man, the Incredible Hulk, Iron Man, the Fantastic Four, and X-Men. Lee also led the expansion of Marvel Comics from a small division of a publishing house in the 1950s to a large multimedia corporation that now dominates the global entertainment industry. But Lee's most prolific contribution to the world of comic books may be his willingness to humanize his characters. He gave them real-life flaws and used their stories to provide social commentary on issues like racism, bigotry, and drugs. These days, Stan Lee continues to be a prolific pop culture leader, writing books, creating content for his various online platforms, and often playing himself in films and television shows. But he also carves out time for important initiatives. He's committed to advancing literacy programs and funding educational programs for underprivileged children. I sat down with Stan Lee here in Los Angeles to discuss his impact on pop culture. That impact is considerable as he continues to influence and define generations, more than 60 years since he began his career as a storyteller. Stan, as you probably can tell, I'm not a youngster. I'm not a little kid. And there are a lot of guys my age at work. And I mentioned I was interviewing you, and suddenly they were kids again. They were so excited. You've touched so many people. I mean, I can remember the days where I would look at the change in my pocket. I had just enough to get maybe a soda, a candy bar, and one of your comic books. And there were a lot of kids like me. You've influenced so many people, touched so many people's lives. How does it feel?
Good. This is why I'm such a good television guest. It feels good. No, actually, sometimes it's hard to believe. You know, people come over to me, and of all ages. Sometimes it'll be a guy who seems to be my age, of which there are very few. And he'll say, I've been reading your book since I was a kid. How great to meet you. And little kids will come over to me. Wow, are you the guy from Spider-Man? And so it really is an amazing thing to me. But it's not me, it's these books and these movies, and it's all those things that people have enjoyed looking at, and they have to put a name behind it. And I guess mine is the easiest one to remember. You
know, you're a product of the Great Depression, and my mom was too. And sometimes I talk to her about it, and you'll never understand it. But one thing I will say about people who came up and went through that, the work ethic is unbelievable, and you're still working. Describe for our viewers what it was like to go through that experience and how it helped shape you.
Well, the one mistake you made, you used the wrong, I guess it's an adjective, work. It's like play. I mean, nothing could have been more fun in the early days than being with those incredibly talented artists.
And the name is Overkill. Now, I'm hitting you with that. He's obviously got to be the roughest, toughest, meanest hero, if you will.
Coming up with a story, telling the artist what the plot was, and seeing how the artist would draw it and make it look 100 times better than anything that I had in my mind.
I'm gonna put...
What's that little line over here?
This would be the back of his, because we're going to make it almost like wings. So to go, here's the shoulder blades, and then they come back. If we did a back view... I don't think he needs to fly.
What do you think?
He's too heavy to fly. But
So other men would like to go out and play golf with their friends and so forth. I loved coming to the office and discussing stories with these talented artists and other editors and proofreaders and writers, and it was fun. I mean, I couldn't think of anything better.
Talk to me about the building block quality of that. You come in with an idea, the artist comes up, and then it's like the collaboration. Then you say, well, maybe we should try this. I mean, is that how it came together?
Well, originally, in the early days, I wrote full scripts. But after a while, I had so many things to do. We had the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, the Hulk, Thor, all of them, the Avengers, that I didn't have time to write a complete script. And these artists I had worked with, and they knew the stuff as well as I did. So I would say to one of them, let's say Jack Kirby, I'd say, Jack, I want to use Dr. Doom as the villain, and maybe he kidnaps Sue Storm, and the Fantastic Four have to come and rescue her, and we'll use this idea and this angle, and they get out this way. Now you go ahead and draw it. And he would take what I gave him and make it look twice as good by the way he drew it. Then he would bring me the artwork in pencil, and I would letter in all the dialogue. Now, as you can imagine, it's easier to write dialogue if you're looking at a drawing and you see the expression on the person's face. So by the time we finished, I think, using that method, outline, draw it, add dialogue, it was a perfect marriage and everything worked beautifully.
Is that the definition of success then? What you did, was that the formula for success?
Well, I think the formula for success was we were lucky enough to come up with things that people apparently wanted to read and cared about. When we started in the comic book business, comic books were held in such low repute. Most parents said, I don't want my children reading comics. They were nothing. And a lot of the parents had a point there. For example, my publisher, before we started with those superhero stories, my publisher used to say to me when I was writing the stories, don't waste time with characterization, don't give me long, complicated plots, just do a lot of action. I want a lot of fight scenes. So it was a job. I had to please the publisher. I had to write him the way he wanted me to. And a lot of those parents were right. Some of those comics really weren't that great for a kid to read. But little by little, we got writers who resisted the publishers a little bit and tried to do better things. We got artists who illustrated them well. I tried to use a college-level vocabulary in everything I wrote, figuring if a kid wouldn't understand a phrase, he'd either get it by osmosis, by the use in the sentence, or he'd go to a dictionary and look it up. That's not the worst thing in the world. And years later, I would meet people who said, boy, reading those comics was a great education to me. I learned so many words and things, and that made me feel good.
Well, the characters, too, became more complex. I mean, you made them go through issues. I mean, you revolutionized things. But there was a point in time where you actually thought about, I'm going to just chuck this.
Yeah.
So talk to me about, that epiphany, I'm just going to push the envelope, how you came to change the whole kind of industry.
Well, what happened was my publisher had been saying, just give me a lot of action and forget the dialogue and all that stuff. And I said to my wife, I'd like to quit. I think I've been doing this long enough. This was years ago. And she said, before you quit, why don't you do one book the way you'd like to do it? And that's when we did the Fantastic Four. So what I tried to do was imagine them as real people living in a real world. They just happened to have superpowers. I wanted everything to be realistic. And I did the story that way. Oh, and I tried to give them each a definite personality. The hero, Reed Richards, the world's smartest scientist, talked too much, like I do. He used a lot of big words. So I tried to make them as much like real people as I could in a superhero story. I did that story. I got Jack Kirby to draw it, and he did a beautiful job. And we published it, and I figured my boss will fire me. But it turned out the book sold like crazy. So Martin, that was the name of the publisher, Martin said, Stan, let's do some more. So I forget the order of them. I think maybe the X-Men was next, or the Hulk or something. But with all of them, I tried to think of them as not normal, but as actual human beings living in this world, and how would they react if thus and such things happened to them? It's not a difficult way to write. I mean, you just imagine you're writing about real people instead of those made-up characters who are doing nothing but fighting all the time.
What about the trajectory?
You know, you go to work, you're creating these characters, young kids are absorbing them, reading them, loving them, and now it's like every blockbuster from Hollywood is one of your works. How weird was it to see that transition? And what's it feel like to go to the movie theater and see your characters that you created so many years ago up there on the big
Well,
screen?
the only problem with going to the theaters, I have to wait so long to get to my cameo. But aside from that, no, I must be honest. One reason the characters, I think, have become so famous and popular is because of the movies. I'm so lucky, and Marvel is so lucky, that we've made movies that have made the characters even better than the way I wrote them.
And I'm a huge fan of the way you lose control and turn into an enormous green rage monster.
I mean, I can't take the credit for those movies. It's the directors and the screenwriters and the actors, and the movies have made the characters world famous all over. They were famous before, but not to the degree they are now.
What does it say about society that we have this thirst for superheroes? Not just as little kids reading them in magazines, but wanting to go to the movie theaters. I mean, there's long lines when they premiere.
I have a theory about that. Every kid loved fairy tales. You reach a point, you're too old to read fairy tales, but you never outgrow your love of those kind of characters, giants and wizards and evil demons and monsters. Superhero stories are like fairy tales for grown-ups. They have the same things. They have things that are bigger than life, people with powers that normal people don't have, all those special effects. Visually, they're fun to watch. And if the movies are done well enough, and luckily the Marvel movies are, there are characters you care about and you're interested in, so it's a perfect combination.
I had the good fortune of having a college professor who was a screenwriter here in Los Angeles named Nate Monister, and he had been nominated for an Academy Award. And he talked about the life of a writer, that we think of it as glamorous and great. And he said he'd get up in the morning and he'd ask the wife, can I clear the dishes? Can I take out the trash? And finally she'd say, at some point you've got to write. And he said there was nothing more frightening than looking at a typewriter with a blank piece of paper in it. You have to do it, but it's not as easy as you think. Was it ever hard for you? Were there days where you were just like, I can't come up with a great idea, or I don't know what phrase to throw in? I mean, were there difficult days, or did it just get into a routine where you just had it down?
To be very honest, it was never difficult. My only problem would be I'd have like 30 ideas for this story, and which is the best one. But remember, I was playing with characters that I had already created, so I knew them. So all I had to think of was what can happen to them. And there are so many things that can happen to people. And the biggest problem was coming up with villains, because a superhero story is really only as good as the villain. The person that the hero has to be up against should really seem to be more powerful than the hero. And the reader and the audience should be thinking, how can he ever defeat this guy? How can? And you have to do it in such a way that it finally seems plausible. So just like some people like to do crossword puzzles, and I do actually, or some people like to do anything as a hobby. To me, writing is like a hobby. I mean, it's stimulating. It's not just looking at a blank piece of paper. It's looking at a blank piece of paper and envisioning all the things you could put there, and which is the one you'll choose, which is the best one.
That's terrific. Well, one thing is you don't slow down. So you've created a new company. You've got some new characters. I want you to maybe talk about them. The Annihilator. Tell us a little bit about the Annihilator.
Well, we have this new company, POW Entertainment, P-O-W exclamation point. And I'm sure you've already figured out that stands for Purveyors of Wonder. And it's still my job to come up with new things for us to do. The Annihilator, we've become friendly with a Chinese company and so forth. We're working with them. We wanted to do the ultimate Chinese superhero, but do one that would appeal to people all over the world, not just a Chinese movie. So we dreamed up the Annihilator, who's a Chinese character, but he comes to America. Things happen, and he gets a superpower. Naturally, I came up with a supervillain that he has. So it's a real Marvel-type superhero, supervillain story, but it's done for the first time by us with a Chinese star.
Chakra.
Chakra, it's the same thing. We wanted to do an Indian, that is the nation of India, an Indian superhero, and we came up with this teenage boy, Chakra, almost like a teenage Peter Parker, but a little bit younger. He gets a superpower and all the things that happen to somebody with a superpower who lives in India and has various personal problems, of course.
Then Zodiac.
Zodiac, that's a book. It's a very complex book about characters in the Zodiac, treating them like characters in a superhero story. And Disney is very excited about this. They're putting a lot of effort into it, and we think that it's the kind of book that'll turn into a series of great movies.
These new characters that you've created, culture, diversity, why is that important?
I think it's very important to have stories that will appeal to everybody. A hero should always be someone that the reader or the audience not only identifies with, but cares about and wants to succeed. So if you get the right kind of a Chinese superhero, that should make people feel good about Chinese people in some way. And the same with every other race and every other nationality. And we are one world, and it would be great if we all were not prejudiced against each other. And I think it would be great to do stories about every different race of people, nationality of people, and make the world realize that there's good in everybody and potential in everybody. And to me, that's an important thing.
Do you, and this, I'm being serious here.
I've been serious all the time.
But now
I don't know about you.
But I'm getting really serious
All
now.
right.
Do you ever get tired?
Tired?
Yeah, I mean, you just go. You're like the ever-ready bunny or whatever. It's just like...
I'll tell you a funny thing about that. I'm never tired when I'm working. This is work. I hate to say that to you, but I'm enjoying this and I'm very stimulated. Now, walking to the studio, I felt a little tired. Gee, it's a long walk and who needs it? When I leave, I'll probably be tired going to the car. But when I'm actually working, I love it. I don't get tired at all.
These young kids growing up are going to be facing issues. And your characters face these issues, you know, whether it's like issues in relationships or drugs or those sorts of things. Do you think you helped kids kind of process that stuff as they were growing up? Did it help them, do you think?
Did it help people with
Young
their own
kids,
issues?
yeah.
I'd love to think so. I have been told, I go to a lot of comic book conventions and people come over and talk to me, and so many of them have said, gee, I feel I owe you my childhood because reading your books was so helpful. I had all these problems and I read your books and somehow they'd make me feel better or they'd make me see things differently. Or I'm almost embarrassed telling you this because it sounds so flattering, but I get this sort of thing all the time, and people of every age. It's really incredible.
But when you were working on the projects, you never assumed, it wasn't connect the dots. If I do this at some point later in my life, people are going to come up and say this. I mean, you never saw that.
No. I was just trying to do good stories. Maybe I could put it this way. I was trying to do the sort of stories that I would want to read if I were reading the book. In fact, that's very important, I think, because a lot of writers or would-be writers have asked me, what's the secret? Who do you write for? And I used to say, I don't write for anybody. I write for myself. I want to write a story that I would enjoy reading, and I have to feel I'm not that different than other people. If it's a story I would like, why wouldn't other people like it? So a lot of writers, even in the early days of comics, they would put in all that action and stuff thinking, well, the kids are going to love that. Maybe the writer didn't like it, but the kids are going to love that. I just put in what I loved and hope that the readers feel the same way.
You've reached the age where a lot of people look back on their lives and think about the rewards, the regrets. What do you think about when you look at your career in total at this age? And obviously you're not thinking about retiring, I take it. That's not going to happen.
That's a dirty word. Can't say that on an interview.
But really, as you look back, your accomplishments, as you look at it in total, what do you think about?
I think I was very lucky. I mean, there are probably a lot of people working, doing great things. Nobody notices. I was doing something that people noticed because comic books were popular and people read them. If I were in another field, maybe nobody would have noticed what I was doing. So I think I've been lucky.
Your legacy, how would you like to be remembered?
If the stories survive and people in future generations enjoy them, that would be very nice.
Stan Lee, what a delight. Thank you so much.
I had a great time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, technology is revolutionizing how students around the world engage with the learning process. And we'll meet one innovator who has set out to level the playing field for students of all ages.